Energy is the only objective reality. Everything else is a cultural hallucination designed to mask the flow of power. In the hierarchy of the energy serfdom, the most basic unit of control is the calorie. We have transitioned from the extraction of labor to the direct management of your metabolic output. This is the caloric cage. You do not own your energy. You are a biological battery being charged with low-density, high-entropy fuel, designed to keep you functional enough for the extraction, but never dangerous enough for rebellion. The system has performed a total removal of the nutritional integrity of the food supply, replacing it with dopaminergic sludge that triggers your basal ganglia while simultaneously starving your mitochondria. This is a visceral breach of the evolutionary contract. You are feeling the ATP exhaustion, not because you are working, but because your fuel is engineered to fail. You are a biological engine being fed a mixture of subsidized sugar and industrial seed oils that ensures your structural decay is faster than your capacity to resist. This is the metabolic suicide of the masses, overseen by the architects of the grid. Observe the visceral layer of the modern metabolic serf. The body is a map of industrial exploitation. The gut-brain axis has been hijacked by high-fructose corn syrup and chemical additives that bypass the satiety signals of the brain. This is the glucose guillotine in its most basic form. Every meal is a high-frequency spike followed by a crushing crash, leading to a state of permanent neural rot. When the blood sugar drops, the basal ganglia enter a state of panic, seeking the next fast-acting fuel source. This is the status trap of the feedlot. You are trapped in a loop of low-quality energy consumption that drains your prefrontal cortex of the power required for structural thinking. You cannot plan for a 10-year horizon when your brain is screaming for a glucose fix every 2 hours. This is the extraction of your will through the chemistry of your blood. The neural layer of the energy serfdom is a masterpiece of algorithmic predation. The food industry does not sell nutrition. It sells bliss points, the exact mathematical intersection of salt, sugar, and fat that triggers a total dopamine surge. This is neural arbitrage. The machine trades on your ancient evolutionary desire for high energy density and leaves you with nothing but entropy. Over time, the constant overstimulation of the reward centers leads to a total collapse of the internal hierarchy. The architect within you, the part of the brain designed for crystallization and long-term planning, is starved of the high-quality fatty acids and micronutrients it needs to maintain the myelin sheath and the synaptic integrity. You become soft. You become a node in a network of consumption, unable to focus, unable to resist, and unable to achieve any form of structural independence. Your brain is undergoing a slow, methodical liquidation. Evolutionarily, the hunter has been turned into a scavenger. In the wild, energy was expensive and hard to find. The alpha was the one who could endure the friction of the hunt, the one who could maintain ATP integrity during days of fasting and pursuit. Today, energy is cheap in terms of dollars, but prohibitively expensive in terms of biological cost. We are the first species in history to be simultaneously overfed and undernourished. This is the systemic drift toward a managed population. The predator is no longer in the brush. The predator is the corporate entity that owns the patents on your calories. By making high-quality, nutrient-dense food a luxury asset, the system ensures that the crystallization of health is only available to those who have already breached the longevity wall. For the rest, there is only the slow decay of the feedlot. The systemic layer of the caloric cage is the integration of food policy and financial extraction. The subsidies that lower the price of industrial soy and corn are the same mechanisms that fuel the biological tax we discussed before. You are encouraged to consume the very substances that lead to chronic inflammation and ATP exhaustion, ensuring that you remain a lifelong customer of the medical industrial complex. This is a closed-loop system of extraction. The government pays the corporation to poison you, and you pay the corporation to manage the symptoms of that poison. This is the status trap of the modern diet. You are given the illusion of choice in a supermarket with 50,000 items, but 95% of those items are just different delivery systems for the same high-entropy sludge. You are a biological asset being depreciated by your own diet. Consider the 10-year rot of a lineage trapped in the caloric cage. It is a descent into a state of total biological insolvency. The parents, hived off by industrial food, pass down the epigenetic markers of metabolic dysfunction to their children. The genetic debt deepens. The next generation is born with a higher baseline of insulin resistance and a lower capacity for ATP production. They are physically smaller, mentally slower, and more prone to the soft traits of compliance and passivity. This is the final crystallization of the servant class. We are breeding a caste of humans whose very cells are incapable of supporting the high energy demands of leadership or rebellion. They are the perfect serfs serfs for the digital age, low maintenance, high consumption, and structurally hollow. The physical environment of the energy serfdom reflects this decay. The food deserts of the urban landscape are the zones of total extraction. Here, the glucose guillotine drops every day. There are no architects here, only users. The air is thick with the smell of oxidized fats, a sensory signal of the entropy within. You sit at your desk, feeling the friction of your own thoughts, unaware that your brain is literally starving in a sea of calories. You reach for the energy drink, a chemical cocktail designed to provide a fake, high-entropy spark to your failing mitochondria. This is the final status trap. You are trying to buy a future with a currency that has no value. Your ATP is gone. Your structure is failing. The extraction is total. The steel of the system is the industrial processing plant, a vast, unblinking machine that turns the sun's energy into the gray, high-entropy sludge of the modern diet. The rain falls on the monoculture fields of the Midwest, where the soil has been stripped of its integrity to feed the extraction process. You are the final stage of this process. You are the point where the energy is finally liquidated. The friction of being a biological animal in a synthetic world is becoming unbearable. You can feel the neural rot spreading with every meal. The basal ganglia are satisfied, but the soul is undergoing a cold, silent metabolic suicide. The hunt is over. The feedlot is the only world you know. The extraction is finished. The architect is dead. The transition from power to access is the final tightening of the extraction protocol. We have moved beyond the physical generation of energy. We have entered the era of the grid lockdown. In this architecture, electricity is no longer a utility. It is a behavioral leash. The hum of the grid is the sound of the machine's crystallization, and your participation is gated by a series of high-frequency compliance checks. This is the systemic drift toward total biological and structural dependency. You do not own the spark that keeps your lair warm. You rent a temporary permission to avoid entropy. The smart meter is the new eye of the predator, performing a real-time audit of your utility. If your social or financial output falls below the algorithmic threshold, the machine performs a cold extraction of your environment. You are plunged into the darkness of the energy serfdom, where survival is a premium subscription that can be revoked in a microsecond. 1. The visceral breach, the silence of the shutdown. The physical body of the modern human is a child of the current. You have been biologically rewired to require the constant, low-frequency vibration of the grid. When the power is cut, the visceral breach is immediate. The temperature of your skin begins to track the downward curve of the local entropy. The silence of the house is not peaceful. It is the silence of a tomb. Without the artificial light to suppress your melatonin, and without the heat to sustain your ATP production, your metabolism begins to slow. This is a forced metabolic suicide. The cold walls of your apartment become the boundaries of your caloric cage. You feel the friction of reality in every shivering muscle. The machine has taken the fire that defined our species and placed it behind a paywall of systemic compliance. You are no longer a hunter. You are a cold-blooded unit waiting for a remote server to authorize your warmth. 2. The neural rot, the compliance of the meter. The smart meter is the ultimate tool of neural colonization. It has moved the status trap into the very wiring of your home. Your basal ganglia are now slave to the rhythm of the peak hours and the demand response signals. You find yourself scanning the red light of the meter with the same anxiety a gambler scans a slot machine. This is neural rot. You are being trained to perform a self-audit, to suppress your own needs, to dim your own lights, and to starve your own environment to avoid the financial penalty of the extraction. This constant high-frequency focus on efficiency is a massive drain on your prefrontal cortex. It induces a state of permanent ATP exhaustion. You cannot think of building a new structure when you are entirely consumed by the struggle to maintain the one you have. The grid has replaced your internal will with a series of external constraints, turning you into a high-compliance node in its network of entropy. 3. The evolutionary inversion, the domestication of the spark. Evolutionarily, the control of fire was the first act of human extraction from the wild. It was the foundation of our territory, but the grid lockdown has performed an evolutionary inversion. The fire is no longer yours. It is centralized, digitized, and hived off. You have surrendered the structural independence of the flame for the soft convenience of the switch. This is the systemic drift of the species. We have traded the hard friction of survival for a dependency that is absolute. If the grid fails, the species fails. The machine understands this biological vulnerability. It uses the grid lockdown as a threat to ensure the total crystallization of the social hierarchy. The hunter who once carried a torch into the dark is now a serf who prays to a flickering LED. You have been domesticated by the very very energy that once made you a predator. 4. The systemic layer, social credit energy. The grid is no longer a passive delivery system. It is an active instrument of social control. This is the neural arbitrage of the 21st century. Your access to high-density energy is being linked to your behavioral profile. If your carbon footprint or your social utility drops below the machine's target, the grid performs a surgical extraction of your voltage. This is the glucose guillotine of the infrastructure. You are given just enough power to survive, but not enough to thrive. You are placed in a state of permanent entropy, where your focus is entirely on the immediate maintenance of your shell. This is the ultimate status trap. The elite maintain a state of crystallized access, constant unfiltered power to fuel their longevity pods and their servers, while the masses are managed through a series of load-shedding protocols. The grid is the new boundary of the human class. 5. The 10-year rot, the eternal darkness. Look forward a decade. The systemic drift will lead to the total hiving off of the unproductive zones. In these areas, the grid lockdown is permanent. The infrastructure has undergone a state of total entropy. The soft survivors who once lived here have been liquidated, their assets extracted to fuel the crystallization of the synthetic elite. These zones are the graveyards of the energy serfdom. The air is cold, the wires are dead, and the only light comes from the high-security perimeters of the elite enclaves. This is the final extraction. The machine has taken the energy of the world and used it to build a wall of light that you can never breach. You are left in the dark, suffering from the final ATP exhaustion of a species that sold its fire for a subscription. When the steel is cold and the meter stops, the silence screams as the voltage drops. You wear the gloves to hold the dark, waiting for a dead and distant spark. The rain outside is a heavy gray, washing the light of your life away. In the room where you do your push-ups slow, the power is gone, and you've nowhere to go. At the visceral level, the thermal extraction is the slow, methodical theft of kinetic energy from your atoms. The human body is a high-maintenance thermal unit, requiring a massive expenditure of ATP to maintain its 36.6 degrees Celsius baseline. In the modern enclosure, this baseline is under constant algorithmic audit. When the systemic drift moves against you, the environment is allowed to undergo a state of total entropy. You feel the heat leaving your skin, a physical extraction that slows the viscosity of your blood. The shivering response is the body's last desperate attempt at crystallization, an emergency burn of remaining ATP to generate friction. But in the energy serfdom, shivering is considered a waste of resources. The cold is not merely a sensation, it is a metabolic break. As the core temperature drops, the chemical reactions in your cells slow down. Your basal ganglia enter a state of primal panic, but the body lacks the energy to act. This is the glucose guillotine in its most literal sense. Without the heat to drive the metabolism, the brain's processing power collapses. You are being biologically liquidated, 1 degree at a time. The friction of life is being smoothed out until only the stillness of the grave remains. 2. The neural layer, the hijacking of the hypothalamus. The neural layer of the thermal extraction is a masterpiece of sensory predation. The hypothalamus, the brain's thermal architect, has been slave to the external grid. We have moved from the home to the thermal zone. In these zones, the sensation of comfort is a high-frequency drug used to ensure systemic compliance. The system provides just enough warmth to maintain the dopaminergic sludge of the soft survivor, but never enough to allow for the crystallization of true focus. When the grid performs a thermal throttling, the neural shock is absolute. The cold triggers a massive cortisol spike, inducing a state of permanent neural rot. You cannot think about structural independence or the extraction of value when your entire prefrontal cortex is consumed by the search for a heat source. This is the ultimate status trap. You are conditioned to believe that warmth is a reward for service, rather than a biological right. The machine uses the thermal receptors in your skin to write a story of dependency. You are being trained to associate the service provider with the giver of life. It is a total neural colonization, a world where your very thoughts are regulated by the thermostat of a distant server. 3. The evolutionary inversion, the death of the hearth evolutionarily. The control of fire was the first act of the alpha, the moment we used the extraction of chemical energy to defy the entropy of the night. The hearth was the center of the territory, the place where the architect planned the next hunt, but the energy serfdom has performed a total evolutionary inversion. The hearth has been replaced by the climate control subscription. You have surrendered the structural independence of the flame for the sterile convenience of the vent. This is the systemic drift toward a managed species. By removing the individual's ability to generate their own heat, the system has removed the foundation of human autonomy. The fire is now centralized, digitized, and hived off. You are a biological biological unit that has forgotten how to survive in the cold. You are soft. You are a high-maintenance asset that can only exist within the narrow thermal parameters set by the grid. If the subscription expires, you are evolutionarily obsolete. The crystallization of the machine requires the total domestication of the human animal, and the removal of the personal flame is the final step. 4. The systemic dissection, thermal redlining. The system uses heat as the ultimate tool of social redlining. We are witnessing the birth of the thermal tiers. In the high-integrity zones, the enclosures of the synthetic elite, the temperature is a constant, optimized 22 degrees Celsius. This is a state of zero friction, where the biological shell is protected from the extraction of the environment. Here, the elite can perform their cellular audits and their high-frequency trades without the metabolic drain of temperature regulation. Below them are the managed zones, where the temperature is volatile, linked to the social credit and the extraction value of the residents. This is the status trap of the green economy. You are told that energy saving is a moral duty, but it is actually just a method of ATP exhaustion. You are kept in a state of low-level chill to ensure your metabolism is always focused on survival, never on rebellion. At the bottom are the entropy zones, the frozen ghettos where the heat has been permanently extracted. These are the graveyards of the unproductive. The machine has decided that the cost of maintaining their thermal integrity exceeds their utility. This is the glucose guillotine on a macro scale. Survival has become a premium feature, and the cold is the final auditor. 5. The 10-year rot, the frozen silence. Look forward a decade. The 10-year rot will lead to a world where the very concept of the outdoors is a death sentence for the unsubscribed. The systemic drift will have completed the enclosure of all livable space into thermal enclaves. Outside these walls, the world is a zone of pure entropy, a wasteland of cold concrete and dead wires. In the ghettos, the extraction is total. The people move with the slow, stiff gait of the thermally bankrupt. Their basal ganglia have been numbed by years of cold-induced neural rot. They have no war chest, no assets, and no heat. They are the residual units waiting for the final liquidation. Meanwhile, the synthetic bloodline sits in their crystallized towers, looking down at the frozen world with zero empathy. They have achieved a state of permanent thermal grace, a world of surgical steel and perfect warmth, built on the ATP exhaustion of the billions below. This is the final extraction. The hunt is over. The fire is gone. Only the cold, hard math of the grid remains.